All right. Thank you everyone for being here. I know we have school counselors, school nurses, school psychologists, school social workers, and it's your week, and also cultural family advocates. We are really pleased to have Dorothy Cella here with us today. As many of you recall, we surveyed you all at the end of last school year, and have you consistently gone to that feedback to help us look at what kinds of professional development opportunities are of most interest to support your practice. And so equity and mental health was a #1 area of need. And so for us to be able to offer to you this afternoon, supporting youth and families of color, we hope that you all enjoy the experience today and leave with something that does exactly that, helps you in your practice. So I am going to introduce Dorothy. You are welcome to have, cameras on, off. Just a reminder that this is being recorded. At the end of each professional development that we offer, we assign credit if you've been here for the full time. So just know that that's our process. We usually need about 2 weeks to get things done and up into Keep Certified. So we will make sure that you get your credit for full attendance of this session, but it doesn't happen immediately when we close out, but you can watch for it. I am going to introduce Dorothy, who, it's not written in here, but she is a 196 grad. So she's kind of here at a homecoming to work alongside us this afternoon. Dorothy has been working in community mental health since 2014 in St. Paul, as well as working at Cedar Valley in Eagan since 2019. Dorothy uses a trauma-informed approach to empower her clients and work collaboratively, within the communities to understand mental health from a BIPOC lens. Her areas of interest include family work, cultural issues, trauma, depression, and anxiety. And as we were talking backstage, with the high number of folks here, we know that this is content that you are seeking to support your work and your family. So Dorothy, just again, thank you for being here. I'll pass the mic to you, and we appreciate the time and energy you've put into being with us here today.
Thanks. Like she said, I'm Dorothy Cella. I graduated from Apple Valley High School in 2006, actually. I should have said in my bio, I guess I got my undergrad degree from NYU, or from the University of Minnesota in Minneapolis with my degree in psychology, and my master's is from NYU, or New York University. I lived there for a few years before I came back here to kind of start working. And when I was there, actually, since I was in Apple Valley, when I was in Apple Valley was kind of how I started my interest in counseling. I did the mentorship program at Apple Valley High, and I shadowed a psychology professor at Normandale, a social worker at Fairview, and a social worker at the Lewis House Domestic Violence Shelter in Eagan. And then that kind of work carried to my undergrad when I did the Aurora Center volunteer work, which is the Domestic Violence and Sexual Assault Center, which kind of led me to my undergrad. So definitely think it all started when I was in high school, when I was a junior, senior, when I took my psychology classes, is kind of how I got interested in the field. And then I've always, since I was an intern in New York, I got the opportunity to work with teenagers, and I really realized I liked the work. I worked at Nystrom first when I first started my career, and that's when I learned that I do not like to work with little kids. Nothing wrong with them. I'm just not a creative person, very stick figure, and I'm very tough kind of therapy type. And so I've been working with middle school, adolescents, young adults, all the way to kind of elder adults throughout my career now. 8 years later, and I've been licensed in Minnesota for almost 4 years, and I'm now board approved supervisor, and I have supervisees, and I've been board approved for about 2 years. So that's kind of like how I came to be in this field today. So let me share my screen. So today I'll kind of be doing a presentation about specifically how to work with youth and families of color. I've primarily worked with people of color my whole career. Even when I was at Nystrom, my caseload was pretty diverse. And my work in St. Paul is in a pretty diverse area on the east side of St. Paul. And so it's almost all people of color there. And so being myself a person of color, I should have said I'm also first generation American. My parents are Congolese. They speak French as their main language. And then of course they speak English and then a lot of other dialects. So I kind of have that first gen, 1 foot in, 1 foot out experience as well. So I forget how this is starting, but let's start. So the objectives today: to increase knowledge on how mental health issues can show up with BIPOC youth, establish some kind of common languages on how to engage BIPOC youth and families on addressing mental health concerns, and advancing cultural humility skills among school staff working with BIPOC youth and families. So I'm actually gonna stop sharing. Okay, so the first activity for today, because there'll be a few, I think activities are kind of the best way to learn, is this how diverse is your universe activity. And so I think the easiest way is just to kind of track on a piece of paper or something. It doesn't have to be super rigid. How diverse is your world? And so you specifically will kind of note what the answers is to the race. So it's like, what is the race of your doctor? And so you'll track, like, is this the same race person? Are these different races person? And then be able at the end to see like how diverse is your world. The questions are on the PowerPoint, and I will, I think, go back to sharing my screen so that you're able to see those questions. But you're just going to be tracking, like, what is the race? Is it the same race? Are they different races? Specify the races of a few other people, or a few of the kind of questions that it asks, if that makes sense. If you have questions, feel free to, throughout the presentation, feel free to put in the chat or unmute yourself and ask. And they'll kind of let me know what questions people have. But let me hide this and I'll give you guys like 2 or 3 minutes, I guess, to let me, or to be able to answer some of these questions. What is the race of your closest friend? The race of the place you worship, if you worship, your neighbors, doctor, etc. And I'll give like a few minutes for people to do this activity. And then I'll go over kind of why. Okay, let me share my screen again. I have some statistics and some different things. In Minnesota, people of color, so Black, Asian, Indigenous, biracial, Native, have all kind of increased as far as population in Minnesota in the last 8 years. So between 2010 and 2018 was the last time it was kind of collected. The race or the population in Minnesota has increased by 20% in the total population. And so white folks are still in the majority, 80%, but it has one of the fastest growing populations during that period of time has been the African American population by 36%. And then the second fastest population to grow has been Asian, which grew 32%. And then after that, it's Hispanic at 24%. And so the state has become pretty diverse in around a decade, which is pretty fast, I think, for that amount of diversity. And that's kind of important to know as far as like the diversity that you're seeing, or working with different families and kind of situations, that's kind of new to Minnesota too, potentially, and being here and being in a space where there's not a lot of folks that look like them. And that has different kind of impacts on mental health, wellness, well-being. In some ways, for some folks, it doesn't for everybody, but it does for some. So I think one of the things that made me want to do more trainings in the last few years has been the fact that there isn't a lot of providers of color in general. And so these are total numbers of all of the providers of color. So Asian, Black, Hispanic, Native, biracial. These are the total kind of amounts of who represents the field. And so for my field, for example, and I'm a licensed professional clinical counselor, the field is there's only 2% of therapists that look like me, right? And if I just said that Minnesota has increased 36% of African Americans, then that means that there's not going to be enough people who match that need at all. And that really impacts youth and families of color when they're wanting to access services and do different things. I think it's important to this kind of talks a lot about that too. It's another stat. 2% kind of hits a lot of the numbers. Asian is the lowest at 1.7, and other or kind of potential biracial would be in here too if they identified in that way, but it's 94 or almost 95% white. And so when we're talking about referrals and we're talking about people wanting services, this is a huge barrier to accessing services. Part of the reason that I think it's important that I do the activity, or that we did the activity that we were doing earlier, was to show, right, like if you are wanting a dentist, a doctor, a lawyer, a therapist, and you're not able to find somebody that looks like you, and that's something that's important to you because you feel that there would be shared understanding, that you potentially wouldn't have to explain different cultural norms or ways that family system work, or potentially deal with feedback that isn't helpful. It's really, really frustrating because you're not finding people that look like you. But people potentially are wanting you to get more services or to go to higher levels of care or do different things. And I think it can lead to a lot of hopelessness when that's not a choice that you even have, right? It's not just about like, is there the access? There's like, if I want to go to a doctor, and it can be in time matters or distance matters, it's very unlikely that you're going to have somebody that looks like me. I've never had an African American doctor in Minnesota ever. I've actually I don't think I've ever had a teacher, definitely not when I was in the district. I never had a teacher that looked like me ever. I've never had a lawyer that looked like me here. I've never had a dentist ever that looks like me here. I think the closest that I get, I've built that now for myself. I have different women of color, but nobody's Black. If I'm able to find that, then that's great. And that's lots of barriers to that, right? Because all of these systems are insurance. So the insurance I take the provider has to take that insurance and have openings or all these different things. And so I think it's really important to just like recognize that when we're looking even at how diverse is our world, there's options you have potentially to have people that feel like they have shared experiences or shared background. And a lot of the youth and families that I work with don't have that option at all. Throughout the presentation today, I'm going to be showing a series of videos. So during the videos, so this is another in-person activity. Normally I would have given everybody sandpaper. And so during the videos, you're just going to like take a nail or a paper clip or whatever. Do not hurt yourself. Do not break skin, please. And you're just going to pick an area on your hand where you're going to rub after the video or during the video what was disturbing. So if the video to you was disturbing in any way, then you'll rub it against your hand. And you have to kind of pick the same place so that you kind of can see at the end of the presentation, we'll talk about why we're doing these videos, but it's just important that you take either a paper clip or just your own nail, please do not break skin again. And kind of rub when you're feeling activated in your body or when you're feeling like something is disturbing in one of the videos, not like egregiously disturbing. This is a presentation for school staff, so it's not super disturbing. Okay, so first, I think it's important that we all have the shared definition of what mental health is. So mental health includes our emotions, psychology, our social well-being. It impacts how we think, how we feel, determines how we relate to others, how stress impacts us, how grief can impact us, how transitions, changes, different things can impact us. It's important at every stage in our life, from childhood to adolescence through adulthood. Everyone has mental health or wellness. Not everyone, of course, has mental health issues. Over the course of your life, if you experience any mental health problems, your thinking, your mood, or your behavior can be impacted. And the things that can kind of impact mental health, at least that I've seen over the course of my career, of course, are biological things such as genetics, things that we pass down, brain chemistry, life experiences, any trauma, any abuse, having family members struggling with any mental health issues or substance abuse, and then any history, I think, of any family mental health issues, diagnosed or undiagnosed, I would say. So I think I can play the video.
For people who still don't think that
Could you hear the video?
Yes.
Yes.
Cool.
microaggressions are a problem,
Oh, you're so well spoken.
just imagine, instead of being a stupid comment, a microaggression is a mosquito bite.
Ugh, it's a compliment.
Mosquito bites and their itch are one of nature's most annoying features. But if you're only bitten every once in a while,
No, where are you really from?
Cleveland?
sure, it's annoying, but it's not that big a deal. The problem is that some people get bitten by mosquitoes a lot more than other people. I mean, a lot more. Whether it's on a date,
Oops, sorry.
Your English is so good.
Excuse me?
going grocery shopping,
You know, everything happens for a reason.
I'm just buying apples.
commuting to work,
So when are you gonna have a baby?
watching TV,
We have to keep the Redskins name. It's part of our culture and history.
or just walking down the street with your partner.
I couldn't even tell you were gay.
Mosquitoes seem to pop up everywhere.
Do you know John? Give me shopping advice. I love Cher too.
And getting bit by mosquitoes every goddamn day,
Can I touch your hair?
multiple times a day,
So pretty.
Can I touch it, please?
Can I please?
is fucking annoying. And makes you want to go ballistic on those mosquitoes, which seems like a huge overreaction to people who only get bit every once in a while.
It's just a mosquito bite. Who cares?
Just another angry black woman.
Of course, beyond just being annoying, some mosquitoes carry truly threatening diseases that can mess up your life for years.
Astrophysics? Maybe you should try less challenging, Major.
Ow, my dreams.
And other mosquitoes carry strains that can even kill you.
He looked like he was up to trouble, okay? I felt threatened.
So next time you think someone's overreacting, just remember, some people experience mosquito bites all the time.
You're all so exotic. Wow.
And by mosquito bites, we mean microaggressions.
Okay.
For
Hopefully you remember to use your nail or paper clips for more videos. So I also think it's important to have a kind of shared definition of what culture is. So for me, culture is a set of shared norms, beliefs, meanings, value systems that are learned and transmitted in society through different social groups or families, ethnicities, areas of living, different things like that. Our culture is very powerful. It influences how we think, how we feel, how we conceptualize ourselves, our identity. It's dynamic, it can evolve and change over time. There's just lots of ways I think that we can include culture with education, sexual orientation, where you're located in the US, where you're located in the world, where you've lived in the world, marital status, spiritual beliefs, all these kind of things all encompass culture. Okay. So cultural competency or awareness, I kind of try to use the word cultural awareness. To be culturally competent or aware doesn't mean that you are an authority in the values and beliefs of every culture. What it means is that you hold a deep respect for cultural differences and are eager to learn, willing to accept that there are different ways of viewing the world. Okon Udu, which, by the way, I Googled their name and I watched a video to learn how to say it. I didn't just know. So I wanted to do these two slides that are going to kind of focus on what people say depression and anxiety feels like. These are some things that I share with youth and families after, like during probably our first session, if not our second session, if they have this diagnosis. And it really resonates, I think, with a lot of them, right? Because a lot of people come in, I mean, I think anxiety, depression, even trauma, are all like terms that are clinical terms. They're not terms that the average person necessarily knows unless they've studied it, right? Like I can tell you what depression is at the back of my hand now because I've been immersed in the work all these years. And when I was in grad school, I learned a lot. And so the average person that we're interacting with does not know these things, right? So giving them like average language or layman's language in order to kind of assess or describe what they're feeling can be really helpful, right? And so people say to me all the time, like, I just feel like I'm crazy or I feel like something's wrong with me. And a lot of the conversations or psychoeducation on what depression is, what it can show up like. One major thing that I don't know that's on here that I'll probably touch on a little bit later, but one major thing, especially with youth of color, is that anger is one of them. If somebody is angry often, that's a huge sign of depression. It's not the internalized, I think, view of depression or the sadness that a lot of people think shows up, but being angry really often, having that hopelessness, that is there. And that shows up a lot more in youth of color and a lot more in boys. And so if you're interacting with students or you're getting reports that someone is really angry all the time, that's one kind of indication to look through the perspective, like, are they struggling with something that they might not even know? Because why would you know these things or these terms unless you have interacted with somebody that has it, or potentially you might have done your own little research or watched TikToks or YouTube videos or whatever to kind of know a little bit about what that is. I see that more with young people. I think they come in with a better idea than their parents sometimes of what's going on because they've kind of been doing their own reading. But I think it's important to know, like, if you tell somebody depression, when someone comes to my office and says, I'll stop sharing for a little bit, kind of comes in and says they're struggling with this or that, it's really important to me to know, to like hear like what's going on, right? Like anger is one thing that I assess really often, and I'm able to kind of talk about with people when they say this is what's going on with their anger, like just assess what's going on with their anger, right? Are you reacting more strongly than you want to, right? Because that's one of the things I assess with anger. Are you reacting more strongly than you want to? So many kids come in and they say, like, I have anger problems. And I say, okay, what does that mean? Where did you hear that term? Did someone tell you that? You know, and a lot of times it's like people tell me I'm angry all the time. And we really assess, because I kind of use the framework from Inside Out. I really love that movie and how it explains emotions. And so I use that framework that says, you know, anger shows us or can indicate that something isn't fair, right? And so what about the situation wasn't fair? Now, I think a lot of anger is misconceptualized for a lot of people because anger itself is not a bad emotion, right? What we do when we're angry is the issue that most people have, but they just say it's anger, or you're mad or these things. And one thing I tell clients all the time is like, if a teacher was disrespectful to you or rude to you, that's not okay. Absolutely not. However, if you throw a chair, that's all anybody's going to talk about. We're not then talking about what happened to trigger or to upset or that was disrespectful to you. We're not talking about the action that came from your anger. And so how do we utilize anger in the way to show us that it's something that's not fair, and either learn the skills to communicate those things, or to be able to take a step back when you're angry and come back to communicate later, but to understand that it's not actually the problem itself, right? What is the issue is the action. Because anger is an emotion, and there are lots of emotions that people do. And when we use it to label people or to marginalize people further, then people don't want to open up at all about their emotions at all, or they think that something's wrong with them, or they don't understand that emotions are a spectrum of different things and that they're important in lots of ways, but potentially the action is what got you in trouble, or the action is where people are saying, you're having these things. And anger is a powerful emotion, sure, and it can be very protective, and we can have those conversations. But when it comes to young people, it's one of the things that I see the most often, or that they bring up most often in intake, is like, somebody said I had an anger problem, or I feel like I did react stronger than I meant to in that moment. But then I didn't know how to walk that back, or I didn't know how to communicate that later. Or now people just think I'm angry, and so it doesn't matter. I'm just going to now act as if people, with the expectations that people have. If people expect me to show up something in this way, why would I do anything different? Why is it worth that time and energy? And so I think that's why it's really important that when we talk about anger, especially when we talk about it with youth of color, that we're talking about why potentially it was an issue, and then also being able to validate what was unfair, right? Because there's a ton of things that are unfair. Now, again, I work with young people all the time, right? So when I tell people things are unfair, it isn't like I'm saying, okay, you don't have to do the thing. I'm not saying that, because I'll definitely say, well, life isn't fair in lots of ways. It's not, right? There's lots of things that we have to do, even if we don't want to do them, even if we don't make sense. Like, for example, during COVID, or the stage of COVID earlier, I was having a ton of conversations, to be honest, with teenagers who were like, what is the point of doing homework online? I'm not learning shit. I'm just watching a video. And, you know, this is their lives, or this is where they have ownership. So, you know, some of my clients, it was like, the principle of the matter is that I'm not learning anything, so why do the test? And I was like, because you got to get it done. Do you want to graduate? Do you want to get credits this year? Do you want to get credits this semester? Do you want to get credits this try? And ultimately, like, I'm their therapist, so my role is very different. They're going to do what they want to do. We're just processing what are the consequences of that action. And ultimately, they're going to decide whether the consequences are worth that for them or not. As they should. This is the autonomy they have in their life. But I think it's important to be able to kind of talk about things through that lens too, potentially. Like, what are the consequences of some of the actions, even if you're feeling really frustrated? Even if you're like, I have clients that are really anxious and they're like, I don't think, can you email my teacher and tell them I don't want to do this presentation, I'm too anxious? And I'm like, no. But we can have a conversation about what you're needing from your teachers or your school staff in order to feel comfortable to do this presentation. And we can work on the coping skills to be able to get through this, because when you can do it, you'll also show yourself that the anxiety doesn't necessarily have to hold you back in that way. But I also, first and foremost, validate the emotion. I would never ever have a young person in my space where they tell me about a situation and I don't validate how they felt, because what I tell people all the time, or what I've read online that I love, is feelings are not facts. Feelings are real, they're valid. I will never take it from you. I'll never tell you that what you felt was wrong, but feelings are not a fact. And a fact is something that we as a society, most people as a society would agree is a thing, right? And so just because you felt like this person was talking about you, just because you felt like potentially this teacher doesn't like you, not to say that you're wrong, is that a fact? what is the evidence or what are the things that kind of are showing up? And how do I also validate, like, okay, it sucks to feel like, you know, they're picking on you or that this thing happened, because I'm not going to invalidate the experience, but I'm going to walk them through it in kind of a different way, if that makes sense. I'm going to share my screen again. Here we go. Hide. So people with anxiety, that's another thing that comes up a lot, is worrying about the future, feeling like they're not good enough. Perfectionism is all over anxiety. Feeling overwhelmed, exhausted, being powerless against their own mind, feeling like you're dying, panic attacks or anxiety attacks, having racing thoughts, worrying all of the time and not knowing why, even potentially being triggered into a panic and fight or flight and all this adrenaline going on. And honestly, people just come in saying, I'm crazy, there's something wrong with me. And then we're able to kind of talk about, like, what does anxiety look like? What is it racing thoughts? Is it worrying all the time about things that are not in your control? Some things potentially that are in your control. Are you preoccupied? Are you having stomach issues? Kind of all these different things to support someone in understanding what's going on with them, more than like something is wrong with me, which is what I hear, like I said, all of the time from youth in general, but especially youth of color. Okay, I already did this video. Okay, so working with students and families, I think some important things for me is that you consider that all students are individual first and recognize that any race or ethnicities are often part of their culture, but how they're involved in it is what you kind of got to get to know, right? Like, you can watch all the movies, all the TV, read all the books and everything, but every person is individually going to show up in their culture differently, have beliefs be really different. And so it's important to get to know the individual in front of you. Like I said, never assume that a person's race or ethnicity tells you anything about their cultural values or patterns of behavior. It kind of shows up really differently. How it could even show up at school very differently than it shows up at home. Because I definitely know that how I was at home, how I was with my friends, and how I was at school was very different, because I was aware of what the cultural expectations or pressures that were put on me and how I had to be, and the places where I maybe didn't have to do those things while I was figuring out my identity and what pieces of the culture fit with me and what things did not. So any research you're doing about any culture, any videos, anything you're watching or reading, or presentations you're listening to, just know that, like, this is a hypothesis, right? And so we're going to, with every student or every group of people that you interact with, this is like something new to see, like, does this fit with them? And how to ask questions about how they're perceiving the world, how they're perceiving school, how things are going for them through the lens of the life that they have. And just remembering too that most minorities or racial minorities in this culture are bicultural, meaning, like, if you're in your own community or you have your own community, so for example, the Congolese community, that was my home life every day, but my school was majority white. So I spent a lot of time in a culture that wasn't anything like mine, but I was home with a culture and a family that looked exactly like me. We all spoke the same language. And so it impacts people in different ways to integrate those two cultures, or to go from one or the other. And people are young, the brain is not developed, they're not necessarily going to be handling this in certain ways that you might view appropriate, or maybe how you would do it. But I think it's remembering the context and the layers of different things, and how they come up. And I'm sure that kind of comes up potentially with students and families, or that's where I see a lot with clients who are young and their parents, when we do family sessions, or when I have conversations with the parents, and when I talk to the kids, and the expectation of the culture, the family, and how things go at home and how things go at school are kind of contradictory sometimes, or different from each other. And how do you then navigate that? And that can be really, really difficult and overwhelming. So I really liked this picture that I found online that kind of talks about the stigma of mental health. So first thing I'll say, and I'll show my screen, I'll stop sharing and I'll go back and forth because it's weird just not looking. So I did a presentation like a year ago with a panel of Black women on Black women in mental health. And one of the things that came out of that conversation was, while there's a lot of negative, I would say, perceptions of mental illness, the stigma of mental health has a lot to do with barriers of access and treatments of minority communities or ethnicities, BIPOC folks in the medical field, in the mental health field, whether it was testing, inappropriate testing, or not feeling supported by people that didn't look like them. And so there's been barriers to being able to access mental health, even just the numbers, right? There's 2% of people that look like me. I get calls all the time. I have people on my wait list for a year for services or longer, because they're like, I heard you're good. I heard you're first gen. I don't want to talk to someone else, or I've made an attempt. I've met many actually people who have been like, I have worked with a white therapist and I just felt like there was a lot of explanations or pity in ways. And one of the interesting things to me is that not everybody tells me that, right, at first. Because I always ask, like, have you been to therapy before? And a lot of people will say yes. And then it's like, oh, what happened? And it's like, oh, it didn't work out. Or I've had clients say, I didn't need it anymore. Just to at the end be more open and comfortable, obviously, to say like, you know, that it was a white person and I just didn't feel that connection. I didn't feel like they had that understanding. And so I just stopped going and I didn't have that conversation with them. And it's hard, right? Because then it was like, well, you needed services and you weren't able to get it. And you were on my wait list for as long as you were, or you made attempts to find other people. And you weren't able to access that. And that's really hard. And so that's a huge barrier. It doesn't necessarily mean that there's a stigma attached to it. It means that there's also barriers, right? And so I want to be able to say that pretty clearly before I kind of get into stigma, because there definitely is stigma. But I think it also has to do with treatment, barriers to access, and then I'll kind of go into what some of the other barriers are, or the stigma kind of. So when it comes to stigma, one of the biggest things that I think affects people of or BIPOC communities is trusting the system. Because one of the things that I struggle to say, but is true, is that I am a part of I'm part of the system. I'm a mandated reporter by law. I have to report certain things. So to act as if I'm separate or outside of it isn't helpful or truthful. And so when you've engaged with the system, or when you've watched the system fail your communities over and over, interacting with the system in this way that holds a lot of power, that potentially allows people to come into your home or allows people to come into your deepest thoughts, is really hard. And so there's lots of ways to try to build that trust first. There's a ton of negative perceptions of mental illness in media. There's been a lot of great examples now. But I think if we think about like the generations older than me, and parents potentially, their perceptions are probably still going to be based on a lot of these negative things. That's why a lot of, I would say a lot, most, if not half and half, BIPOC youth are the ones that advocate themselves to go to therapy. Their parents say that they came and said that that was something they needed, or the client themselves said, like, I told my mom I really want to try therapy and different things. And so it's pretty awesome, I think, with the younger generation to see that that perception is not as negative. I went to talk to the health class at Apple Valley High and the developmental psychology class at Apple Valley High about mental health and kind of the work I do. And it was really funny to me because I was telling them earlier, all the teachers, and I think it was just to prepare me maybe, they were like, the students are really quiet. They're not going to probably ask a lot of questions. People are shy. I think most classes are 50 minutes. The developmental psychology class, I think, was like an hour, hour and a half, 2 hours. And we went up the whole time. The kids asked tons of questions. They either wrote them down and they gave me pieces of paper, or they raised their hand and asked. And so that kind of showed me too, like, the young people are really interested in mental health. And some of it was questions from themselves. Some of it was like, how do I support my friends when they're going through stuff? Some was like, some of my friends are going through things that are too heavy. How do I set boundaries? And so this is something that they're really interested in learning and knowing more about and having lots of questions. I think it's just, how do you engage with them and talk to them and be open with questions that they have and let them kind of lead the discussion in that way. Fear of discrimination is a huge, huge one. Whether it's fear of having other systems in your life, fears of being labeled crazy and that's limiting you, and lots of cultures or communities, like for example in my culture and Congolese culture, there isn't like a real system for mental health. There's like a hospital, but a lot of people go to jail with mental health illness. That's not necessarily different than here, but there's not systems that are in place to help them. And so yeah, when you come from a marginalized community, you want to be marginalized, even like you want to limit how marginalized you are. You don't want to add more things to be potentially marginalized against. And I think that's where a lot of conversations with families and parents come in, of like, is this something that's coming up, right? It comes up a lot with BIPOC LGBTQ youth and families, right? I think there's a lot of ideas that like certain communities of color are homophobic or more homophobic than other communities. And I think a layer that people are missing is, if you have a Black young person or a Black child and that, or an Asian child, and then that child comes out as queer in any way, then part of what parents are concerned about is you're going to even be more marginalized than you already are. And I would want to protect you from that. Now, are all the ways that you can? Not necessarily, but I think it's being able to understand that perspective. And so when you have all these things, it's pretty easy to avoid resources. And I saw a video earlier this week when I was working on the presentation that kind of talked about how mental health issues, or mental health in general, is seen as such a separate thing from physical health and the medical system. And so if a child is coming to a parent who's grown up in a certain way, or has dealt with discrimination or stigma and or has negative perceptions of mental health, or has barriers and things like that, right? And their perspective of mental health is like, it's something that's a personality or behavior, then why would they not necessarily say, hey, just change your behavior, change your perception? You know, when the medical system, it's already put in place a lot of times, like, go to the doctor, go get help. And we don't necessarily have that as strong in the mental health community. It's definitely changing, but I think it's also acknowledging, like, people avoid help and resources because of a lot of the negative perceptions or the labels or the misconceptions that people say. Or you see people that have untreated mental illness, and then you think like, okay, that's going to be you, or that's how it looks like for you or for your kid. And if this is my idea of anxiety or depression or PTSD, and it's like very linear, then I'm not going to necessarily buy into it or believe in it, when I can potentially steer my child into, just change your behavior, just change your perception. These things don't go into the system and get labeled in this way that potentially will carry for years and years and years. And so those things I think are also important to know. So working with students and families, one of the biggest things I think is just education on mental health. Like, what is it? While I definitely think that everyone has mental health, not every community or culture or place in the world has the words for mental health. they literally don't have the language. They don't have the language for anxiety or depression. And that's why I think it's important to be able to explain it in other ways, and how it can show up in other ways. Um, a lot of our stress and a lot of our stomach issues, racing palm, all these like physical things show up and they're impacted by our mental health, or mental health is impacting the physical. And so another way to kind of engage with families is to talk about like, how's their health? How's your health? How's the students' health? How does stress show up for students? How does stress show up for their parents? What do they see in their household when it comes to stress and how people deal with it or don't deal with it? So how is your sleep is another good way. How are your relationships with family, with your coworkers, with school activity, peers, friends? What's going on? I think sometimes, like if a student is in your office or you heard something happened, right, they're potentially there, instead of saying or leading, right, with like, hey, it looks like you're really upset or angry today, or I heard you were really angry. I think starting with a young person, like, how's it going? How are you feeling? What are you thinking? Is such a good way to open the door to conversations. My clients are pretty aware of the flow of therapy at this point. And so a few years ago, I put into place, because I think I was realizing that with every individual person, I was starting sessions very differently, and that was really hard. And so I saw on a Facebook group, somebody said like, what do you want to talk about today? And so that's my opening for therapy. All my clients kind of know that. It's pretty interesting and funny to me at this point, right? Because some are anxious, and so they're very, and I know because I know them now, they're gonna be like, oh, why do you ask me that? It's so stressful. It makes me feel so anxious. Can we just start a different way? And for those clients, I'll be like, yeah, like, how's your week? How was your weekend? How's the family? Because they need it eased in. Because after a while, they're like, okay, this is what I want to talk about today. And then I have the clients that are like, okay, this is what I want to talk about, boom. And I have the clients that are like, what do I want to talk about? I was thinking about that in the lobby. I was thinking about that on the way here. I'm not sure. Then I have the clients that are like, there was so much that happened. I don't know where to start. I don't know where to start. I'm stuck. And then I'm usually like, I don't know where to start because I don't know what happened this week. So just pick a place and start, and it'll flow. It always flows. You know, and so what are kind of different ways that you're engaging with students or families to have conversations? They're really hard conversations that bring up a lot of things that can be very triggering or activating in the body, to be able to help them ease into the conversations or think about mental health in a different way outside of like maybe stereotypes or things they've seen on TV. How's your appetite? Another one to kind of know, because of just the ways that people are struggling with eating. There's been a huge increase in eating disorders over the pandemic with young people. Those things really impact your mental health too. If you're not eating a lot, if you're stressed a lot and you're not, or that can be a sign of anxiety. I think for me, when I was young, anxiety showed up 100% with stomach stuff or food stuff. And just being so anxious that I couldn't eat, but not knowing how to tell people that without it sounding kind of crazy, or without feeling like people were gonna make assumptions or tell me stuff. Like, I mean, I love my dad in lots of ways, but he's always been one that's like, put it out of your mind. Just put it out of your mind. And I was always like, yep, I'm just gonna pick the thing that's stressing me out and put it out of my mind. That's all I need to do. If I could do that, I wouldn't be talking about it. And if I could do that, I wouldn't be in therapy. And so I think it's hard sometimes if the questions aren't open, or they're not kind of supportive in being able to talk about your mental health. So some more slides on some questions to ask, like being empathetic, not saying stuff like pull it out of your head or pull yourself up or cheer up or stuff like that, or kind of toxic positivity. I think balancing positivity and stuff like that. How are you feeling? How long have you felt like this? Who do you go to for support? What do you do when you're feeling stressed, down, anxious? Are there anything going on in the classroom, out of the classroom that's kind of making you feel this way? What things do you think you need for support? How can I help you? How can I be of help? What do you need? Okay, so this is the activity.
Your name is your identity. It's something you're supposed to take pride in and feel ownership of. But when teachers, coworkers, and friends constantly screw it up and don't even try to get it right, that can really change how someone feels about their place in the world. So we decided to talk to a few people that have firsthand experience with this.
My name is Rekha Shankar. Not Rika, not Rekha, and definitely not Rachel.
My name is Jiko. So that's like a number 1 and a letter G and co like company in one word. So 1 Jiko.
My name is Momo Pujay, not Momor Paye, not Mumo Pujay, not Mamu. It's Momo Pujay. It's so simple.
My name is Mamadou, not Armadillo, not Marmaduke, not Mumu, not Mumam, Mamadou.
If you want to say my name correctly, it's Maritza Montañez, but you can just say Maritza Montañez. And that's the anglicized, easy version that you should be able to say.
People mispronounce my name 7 days a week.
In 6th grade, my English teacher mispronounced my name for an entire year.
An open mic is just like Matt, Jim, Matt, then Mumo. This is like, get the out of here.
So I have to introduce myself with a little mnemonic, like, I'm Rekha, you know, like rake, as in the thing for leaves. And I still get my name mispronounced, even with the mnemonic.
When somebody actually gives me that question, like, hey, am I saying this correctly? Immediately I want to marry them.
I just be like, oh, they said Maritza. That's so exciting.
That's how low the bar is. That's how many people have mispronounced my name and didn't care about it.
So there's a bunch of different types of mispronouncers.
There's the gracious mispronouncer, somebody who's trying their best and is gonna keep trying.
And if everyone did that, oh, it'd be great. We'd all be in such a better place.
There's the mumblers that kind of start and then trail off into the distance.
Maritza?
Like the Doppler effect.
They're begging for you to like, hey, please, let's work something out.
Then there's the nicknamers. There are 2 types of people who are nicknamers. The people that'll give you a shortened version of your name, like, hey, mama, that's not my name. And the people that'll give you an English version of your name, like, hey, Martin, is like, I didn't have a dream.
I had a tennis teacher once that was like, Rekha, I'm just gonna call you Rachel. Thanks, other parent.
You don't get to assign me a nickname. That's not how it works.
I like the nicknamer who doesn't even say your name, just says fill-ins for your name, like my guy, yo, what up, dog, my G, my dude.
No one should be a nicknamer. They're terrible people.
Then there's the whatever people. These people don't care about your name at all.
You will correct them. They will say whatever they have been saying, and then just say, whatever.
We're definitely not gonna be friends. I already don't like you, so this is not good.
If you do this, you are a bad person.
When you get your name mispronounced all the time, it makes you feel like less of an individual because you have to respond to all these things that are not your name.
Dealing with this almost every day is mostly just exhausting.
If you don't say my name correctly, it's basically like saying, I don't care about you as a person.
Imagine if your name was Rachel and you had to start responding to Rachel or Rackle. That's not your name, it's nobody's name, and it sounds gross.
When someone says my name right, it feels just like, oh, we're baseline agreeing that I'm a person.
When you're younger, it's really easy to feel discouraged by your name, but as you get older, everybody loves hearing your name, and then they want to say your name, and you want to hear your name being said by people, and you take pride in it. It's like things go from being a negative to being a positive for you.
So say my name right, or my mom's coming for you.
Okay, so what can you guys be doing to kind of help families and students with their mental health, or just being able to kind of build the trust for them to be able to talk to you guys about things that are going on? I think building trust, rapport, and communication by just getting to know them for who they are. What brings them joy, their dreams, their hopes, their fears, their talents, their experiences. One part of therapy for me that I'm pretty clear on with my supervisees and that I've been with myself is that rapport takes about, I think on average, like 3 months with our clients, our BIPOC youth. It takes that long to kind of just for them to get to know us and for us to get to know them and for them to feel like this is I'm consistent. I am who I say I am. I show up how I say I'm going to. You've seen my patterns of behavior, and that you see that I'm authentically myself. I try to be as much as I can at my job, and I'm grateful that I have a place where I can. And that I genuinely care about them. I'm genuinely excited about their hopes and dreams. And when things happen for them, when they start dating for the first time, or when they ace a test, or client just told me all of her grades for the last try, and I was like, I'm really proud of you. And I think that's a huge thing for youth, that they don't get to hear that often. And my young people are very sarcastic. I'm very sarcastic. So they can be very dismissive. And I think one thing that I've learned for myself, because it's super weird to tell people that I'm proud of them, because I didn't hear that much growing up, but I think it's a huge experience for both of us. And we'll say like, that was weird to hear. And I'm like, that was weird to say. I think we're all feeling really uncomfortable right now, but I am really proud of you. That's genuine. And it's important that you hear that, because I know how hard you've worked, and I know what you've done. And I'm genuinely wanting to know, like, what are your interests and things like that, because when they feel like you really care, especially youth of color, because there's so much in the world that shows them that they don't matter. There's so much that shows them that people have expectations of them that are low, that people don't believe in who they could become, or they feel defined by things from the past or the traumas they've gone through, and that you genuinely have hope, because without that authenticity, they will not mess with you. I mean, for myself included, and for a lot of BIPOC people in general, and youth, it's a vibe. And for some, there's a vibe, there's a connection. For others, it's not the right fit. And I think it's also important to know, like, I'm not the right fit. If you're not the right fit, is there another staff that they can go to or talk to or bond with and things like that? Because for some reason, our personality just is not vibing with each other, or not connecting for some reasons. And not to internalize that or personalize that, because like I tell every client, just because I tell a lot of people in the beginning, everyone at the beginning, like, I might not be the right fit for you as a therapist. Just like every person you meet does not become your friend, does not mean that just because we sat and talked means that I'm the right therapist for you. The system that we have in place says that you have to sit down with me and meet me and tell me all your stuff and do this intake, and then kind of decide if you want therapy, which is a very weird part of the system. But I want you to feel the empowerment to decide, am I somebody that you actually want to sit down and talk to? Am I somebody that you can build with? And if I'm not, let me know and I will help you find someone. And over the years, there have been a few people that have said that, like, hey, I don't think that we're the right fit. Is there a way that you can help me find someone else? And it's like, of course, because ultimately I want you to have the support that you deserve to have, and the therapist that you can connect with. And so knowing that, collaborative approaches, like just saying, like, how are you doing? What's going on? How are you feeling? What are you needing? Even giving like 3 or 4 options, 2 to 3 options of some things, and just letting them know, you know, I'm not here to like tell you all the things to do, or I'm not the expert in your life, and I'm not the expert in wellness or healing and all those things. I'm just here to support you in your journey until it's not my time to support you anymore in this journey, and you go off to the next support person in those ways, and really joining with them in that way, because I think a lot of youth they don't have autonomy in their life totally, right? Like they have parents, they have potential teachers, or different activity leaders, or whatever, coaches, who all have kind of expectations or things that they have to do, and the ways they have to do them. And so being able to, when it comes to mental health issues or working with families of color, to give them choices and be collaborative is one of the best ways to help with them. I think being able to talk about, like, how is mental health viewed in your culture? That was one of the questions that I got about the presentation. And that really differs everywhere, right? Like all throughout the world, mental health is seen in different ways. Systems are in different ways. There are beautiful ways that people kind of support mental health and wellness. There are not some helpful ways, like I said, jail and stuff like that, that people do. But I think it's important to just like ask people themselves, like, how do you view mental health? How is mental health viewed in your family system, your older family system? Stuff like that can be really helpful in just being able to have a better understanding of maybe why there is some resistance to some mental health supports, or total shutdown of the conversation in mental health, and stuff like that. And then I think when talking with parents and engaging with parents, in order to kind of maybe talk about mental health, just like what are they seeing at home? What are they seeing with their child or their children? What are they noticing? Are there things that are going on that you guys should know that's important in the family system itself? And are they seeing their kids stay in their room more, just isolate more, be sad more, maybe be more angry, worrying a lot more, the changes in weight, appetite, all those things? Because that's another way to kind of even talk to them about, like, if you're seeing a lot of crying, if you're seeing a lot of sadness, if you're seeing a lot of anger, that could be a sign of what we call depression. And this is the signs of those things. And these are ways to help. And that depression does not mean that it's a lifelong diagnosis. Depression does not mean that necessarily that you're going to be on medication, and things like that. It just means that you might be struggling through a moment in time, and it's very likely that every adult has struggled at a moment in time for longer moments than others. And so how to kind of open that door and have those conversations.
I work as a research assistant, and so a while ago, one of the our new RAs, when I was a few months into it, came up to me and just mentioned that even though we'd known each other for months at that point, you're the least scary black guy I've ever met. In the way that I dress, the way that I talk, the way that I speak, I've kind of tailored that over the course of my education to be non-threatening.
I will literally have like my keys in my hand, like they're always with me, and I'll just like jingle them as I'm walking so that they know that I know that I'm there, so that we both know that I'm right here and I'm not gonna try and do anything to be stupid. But on that note, there's also the stigma that like we're aggressive and intimidating.
It's sad you have to make sure you let people know you're not a threat. And that's jacked up. So.
One of my friends commented to me, he said, I don't really even think you're black, you're, and I was like, what? I was like, what do you mean? He's like, you're smart, you do your work, yes, you're athletic, but you do your work, you're smart. So I don't really know if you're black. I was like, I didn't understand. It made me question who I was and if I was still a part of the culture.
And that's an example of micro invalidation and a micro insult. And I'm going to talk about those a little bit more.
Okay, so what are some more things that you guys can do? So one of the things I think that I've learned out of cultural awareness or cultural competency, right, is like we kind of get really stuck in the golden rule of treating people how we want to be treated and kind of then centering ourselves as that person, right? And if you're working with other ethnicities and other cultures, I think it's really about getting to know them and like what are the things that they're needing and how do they want to be treated, right? And what are the things that impact them? And obviously within the school system and the structure and the rules, but like what are they kind of looking for and what's possible and what there's room for is really, really important. Just asking people their preferences on how they want to be treated during a mental health crisis or when they're having symptoms. Having those conversations can be really helpful. I think myself, just because I have anxiety, I'm a preparer, even as a therapist. And so I love to prepare my clients for things. Like, I'm like, okay, so if you're going to get another anxiety attack, what are some things you can do? 2 things, 3 things? Because one of the things that we know is like, if you're having an anxiety or panic attack, you're not coming up with any new information. If you're having if you're triggered from trauma, you're not coming up with new information, but it's very likely that you'll be like, Dorothy and I talked about what to do in this moment. It's already there. I can just pull it. And then that's the thing to do. And even saying giving them that, what saying do you want to have? What thing do you want to say to yourself? And sometimes it's like, what did Dorothy and I talk about? What did Dorothy and I plan? And that could be enough. to kind of trigger like the thoughts. Talking to colleagues, going to consultation groups, consulting with mental health practitioners, having trainings like these, reading books from authors that don't look like you, watching TV, movies, listening to podcasts. Therapy for Black Girls is a great podcast. I really, really love Dr. Joy and just what she's brought to the field. I share that with literally, I think every one of the Black women that I work with and girls, just to supplement that and to listen about mental health. And that could be a good resource for families. And just recognize too that you're a work in progress and that you're going to make mistakes. There's going to be ruptures in relationships that you have with students. I think being authentic means that there's going to be ruptures, and like, what does repair look like with students? As a therapist, I put my foot in my mouth almost all the time. I'm a human being, a work in progress, and I've learned how to have the humility to apologize and repair and to leave space for clients that are upset. I definitely get cussed out. It's rare. But I get cussed out. I've gotten fired from clients. People were just not the right fit, or it's something I said was just not the right timing for them to hear it. And I give space to that. Doesn't mean I don't get pissed. Doesn't mean that half the time I'm like in my head, like, I could really cuss you right now. I could change my tone. But I'm not going to, because I'm the adult in the space. I have the ability to cope and to manage my emotions. And if I didn't, I wouldn't do the job. Or if I didn't, I would have walked out of the room in that way, in that day, or I would have went to my boss or did different things, because I'm not always my best self at work, or I'm tired sometimes, I'm sick. I have stuff going on in my family, but I think it's important for me to always recognize the role that I have, the power and the position that I have, and that I am the adult who is supposed to model different things and show up in different ways. And that happens by repairing ruptures and by being authentic and by owning mistakes that I've made, even if it's something I didn't mean to say to hurt the client, or even if it was something that was taken a certain way, being able to have that open conversation, because I'm not perfect. I don't have all the answers. I don't want to have all the answers. I want to be in charge of nobody's life but my own, because that's hard enough. And so I think just recognizing those things are really important. Last video. So this video is going to address the question that I got about code switching, because I thought it was just an important thing to hear people talk about it themselves.
The most disrespected person in America.
I think it starts here.
At work, because you can be your whole self at work, and that's not my reality.
I really struggle with code switching. I struggle with it in every single arena.
So code switching is essentially when you know that you cannot be fully oneself when you're talking. So there are times when I'm talking to white people, I have to amend my speech and change that, because I'm like, if I start talking a particular way, you're not gonna get it.
I've used code switching in many contexts, mostly at work.
I turn it on. I have to be my best unauthentic self in order for me to relate to my white peers. And I have to make sure that I can talk about subjects that relate to your lifestyle that have absolutely nothing to do with mine.
I can switch from a Nigerian accent to like being here, living in New York for 15 years and be like dead ass OD and it's fine. And then like go into my more proper sounding voice, whatever that is.
Hi, this is Ryan Ashley. It's so nice to meet you.
I call myself multilingual because I can go back and forth between different languages. Southern Black, Northern Black, code switching for the whiteness.
I don't foresee me code switching for a white person. If anything, I would probably act blacker with a white person just to see. But code switching, no. I think it's been an issue for me actually, how much I don't code switch, you know.
The way I talk to my boss is not how I talk to my friend. It's not how I talk to my niece or anything like that. And I think that has to do with my own internalized like anti-blackness and maybe some like feelings that I need to kind of interrogate around like the class, the economic class I grew up in.
Figured out what works for different people, how to speak to different people, what to say to make it easy on the ears and the heart so I can get around this.
it comes with the territory, and it's such a survival mechanism that I can't even tell you how many times I do it. I do it every day. It's so second nature to me that I cannot tell you specifically. I'm like, I probably do it 20 to 50 times a day, depending on who I'm talking to.
To me, like, you can't talk about code switching without talking about survival, because some people don't have the benefit of just being themselves because they will literally lose their job or they will lose economic opportunities. And it shouldn't be on them to code switch, but it is a necessary component for survival, I think.
Knowing that, okay, I have to like amend myself based on the environment I'm in, because if I don't, it could actually be potentially, it's either I can I can lose bread over it, or I can lose my own personal safety over it.
Those are the weapons that people like to throw at you.
If I don't understand the rules of the game, it's unsafe for me. And it's unsafe for so many other people. And it's humiliating and it's frustrating, because I shouldn't have to prove my humanity to someone else. If I could say anything to my younger self, I'd be like, fuck it.
You have the culture, the gender, and the style and the flair of what companies pay millions of dollars to buy and like extract. Don't take other people's shit personally. It's their stuff. You have to worry about what and how you feel about you. You have to be concerned with what your thoughts and your feelings are about yourself.
That they can just exist, and that can look any number of ways that they want, and that's okay. And that if they just take a breath, they'll have the patience and the confidence and the bravery to do what just sits right in their spirit.
Your Black is beautiful. You wouldn't understand how amazing you are. I wish I would have known that, because there was a lot of days I didn't feel like that.
Stop taking responsibility for other people's stuff. Stop taking ownership of other people's things, especially when you are an other.
It may seem very dark today, but you might be a person that people are inspired by one day, and you might be a person that helps pull someone right out of the depths of the shadows that you're living in now. So, you know, stick to it, sugar, and you're gonna be cute, so, you know, there's that.
I'm gonna make everything all right. Don't look to anybody but me, because I know what you need and I know what you want, and I got you. That's what I would say to my younger self.
So culture and mental health, some other things to know, I think, are just not to prejudge, like I've said before, cultural history values that are relevant to your work with the clients or students. Engage them in learning what things matter to them and what things should be important. Identify the strengths of culture and where they come from and the community that they have, and engage the family in that same kind of conversations about community and building. Because I think with BIPOC youth, one of the biggest things is community, and how to build that, how to have the people around them that lift them up and make them feel good and have that understanding of different things. Just knowing your own attitude about like cultural pluralism, which is a form of cultural diversity, where certain cultures can maintain their unique qualities, and then kind of conform to the larger culture. And so how do you kind of notice, like, am I promoting being more engaged or kind of becoming more assimilated into this dominant culture, the Minnesotan kind of culture, or white culture, for students that just are not a part of that culture? And where are your kind of biases or beliefs and ways to potentially support them that might kind of go against their culture or make them feel like where they come from is not a good or healthy place, or that they need to change kind of those things in order to be safe or healthy here. Always just kind of having that understanding that there are lots of different cultural explanations for individual illnesses. There's a whole section in the DSM about that, and being able to associate or incorporate different cultural beliefs and attitudes in mental health work. So with Native clients, I know we use a lot of their community, and we bring in their spiritual leaders in sessions with us, to kind of talk about what are some things going on. And so there's not always the assumption, and the same with Asian clients. I had one just last week say like, hey, I'm really getting interested in spirituality. I've been having these dreams and different things. Do you think you can help me find a shaman in my culture so that I can kind of explore those things and how to support myself and my mental health and build myself up? And I was like, I don't know where I'm going to find it, but let's do some researching together. And I talked to some colleagues and I was able to give them 4 or 5 names, which was really awesome. And just be aware of the cultural, racial differences and elements in the relationship with students and families. So I'm gonna stop sharing my screen so that I can talk to you guys now. But one discussion I'd like to have is, how do you feel with your hand after the videos? If anyone is brave enough to ask or to answer.
My hand is sore.
Okay. You know why?
I was rubbing in the same place for a long period of time, I guess.
Okay. Anyone else want to be brave?
I would say irritated.
Okay, one more person before the next question.
Red and raw.
Okay. Next question. Which video impacted you the most? What part of your day or week impacted you the most? And why?
I'll share. I like the one about the names because I think that's kind of a little too close to my heart. I mean, I'm a first generation immigrant. So I kind of look at it with the pros and cons of being in a different country and getting mainstream and all of that. But then my kids are born here, but they do have Indian names. So I used to hear that for years, but now they're high schoolers. I hear that all the time from them. And sadly, my advice to them have been, hey, you just cannot get away with that. It's just going to be part of what you are going to come across for the rest of your life. That's it. It's just part of you. You're never going to get used to it, but know that that is just part of your life. And initially they would resist, but now they're used to it. It's just become like a dinner conversation. Hey, guess what was the variation today that I got? So it was very close to me.
Thank you for sharing. Two other people. What day? We can also do more if you want, but because there's a lot of other questions. But which day impacted you?
The microaggressions.
Why?
That really impacted me. I've had a lot of them in my family, my personal family. My husband is African American, so we've had a lot of, my daughter is dark skinned like him. My son is light skinned like me, and both my husband and I have people have said to my daughter, is that your mom? Or they've said to my husband, is that your son? Those kinds of things. And that one about touching the hair, when my son he's got blonde curls. And when he was in kindergarten, a little Latino boy here at school, it's like, can I touch your hair? And that's sweet and innocent because it's different, but when adults are saying those things, it's just, so anyway, that one just really hit home.
Who else wants to share?
I liked the video on code switching.
And just really understanding the burden of having to be different people in different roles of your life and having that just be a constant burden.
Okay, thanks for sharing. Does anybody want to share before I ask the next question? Okay, which day was the worst one? So the question I asked prior was which was the most impactful one, but which one was the worst one? Three people.
The one where the African or African American males were talking about how they had to broadcast to everybody that they were a safe person, you don't have to be worried about me, made me so sad. And that one made me feel the most helpless because it seems like one of the most difficult things to overcome. Like how do you keep that from affecting you, and how do you keep from being a part of that?
Thank you for sharing. Two other people, what was the worst day? And you can share the same videos.
For me, that lady from Nigeria, the code switching, that kind of, you had to code switch to show that you are humane. That did make, it was hard.
I agree with that. And I would add about it being a survival technique, really, and that to not know, I think Kelly said it, like the rules of the game, it makes it unsafe. And I feel like that's such a common experience for our students of color. So I agree with that.
Thank you for sharing. So 2 more questions, and then I'll kind of talk about why I do the video. How would you have described your week to somebody? All that stuff happened all throughout your week. How do you describe what happened?
I would think it would feel really exhausting and hard to keep going on.
Thank you for sharing. Share. The other question is, what support would you have needed from others during your week?
Dorothy, I was thinking about the other question. How do you explain? How do you feel if you have to explain your week? And I imagine, so here, how does one have the strength to get up and carry on? Defeated, demoralized, right? Unseen. Yeah. I guess those are the words that keep going through my head right now.
Thanks for sharing.
Yeah.
I think that you wouldn't be able to describe your week to someone that didn't have that same understanding, because it'd be too exhausting to try to explain to someone who doesn't have that many mosquito bites. And I think you would need to be able to be in a space with someone who can support you without having to explain every mosquito bite.
Thanks for sharing. Does anyone know what they would need? It's okay if you don't. But I think we should say that too.
I would think one thing, they need someone to talk to that understands.
To be heard and to be validated.
I am trying really hard to not, if I see something that's a microaggression, I'm trying to tactfully point it out so that it's not just sitting there and we're not talking about it. And not expect the Black person in the room to be the one that has to point it out. I can say something, and I can at least acknowledge and recognize that was a hurtful thing to say.
Thanks for sharing. So I'll kind of talk about why I did the video, and then I'm going to open it up to any questions you put in the chat and stuff like that, and then I'll put the evaluation in the chat too. But the reason that I do the videos over time, I don't even know why I started, but I think one thing is to kind of give people a different perspective of like what it feels like to be BIPOC sometimes in Minnesota, especially, because almost all of those microaggressions have happened to me as a young person and as an adult, as a person with a master's degree. And I think sometimes when we're working with young people, we have expectations that they can explain what's going on with them. And most people here struggle to say what was happening, right? And you are all adults. Most probably have fully formed brains. And so at 25, older than 25, and you couldn't do it. And so how do you expect a young person, a BIPOC young person, to kind of come and talk about these things, and even to understand how it's impacting them? Because I think sometimes to know how we feel, we have to understand what's going on and how it impacts. And there's so much time where you just spend confused at first, especially when you're young, because you're not born out the womb like defensive, and you're not born out the womb thinking that people are going to think these negative things or have these perceptions or just butcher your name and not even care to try. But it happens all the time. And then I think when people have behaviors at school or don't want to show up somewhere, we focus so much on how school's important and you have to do the thing because it's a thing you have to do, without actually saying like, how are you feeling? Has there been a bunch of mosquito bites today? What are you needing to get through the day? Because sometimes 3 of those mosquito bites happen on the bus before you even get there. Then you get there and someone says something and maybe you lose your shit. And you don't even know. It's because I was built up to that point and I exploded. And that's a lot of work I do with clients. Like they come when they're saying I have anger issues or I have this or that. I'm like, let's talk about the day. What happened? Or when they lost it, let's talk about what happened through the day. And even I'm able to help them see through a timeline. I do like a kind of timeline activity. Like, I think at this point you were irritated. I think when this thing happened, you were annoyed. I think when this thing happened, you got mad. And I think this was the thing that pushed you over the edge. And they can kind of connect and then come back in their body and be like, I was irritated and I was frustrated and I didn't have anywhere to go at school, or I didn't know what to do because it was like, well, you still got to go to class. You still have to do different things. Like, whether or not we think we are showing up for young people in the ways that we can, I think we can evaluate, but I also think we can show the ways we failed young people. Because part of what I hear and see and fight all the time is like, there's lots of school staff where a lot of my clients have gone to the hospital for different things, or they're struggling with their mental health. And one of the things I always encourage them is to talk to their school staff. But then they hear their math teacher say, well, okay, you're telling me about this anxiety. You can't get out of the test though. You still have to do your work. So why was that the first thing you said? Because then they come back to me and say, I did the thing you told me to do, and this is what I heard. And I wasn't trying to get out of my work, Dorothy. And I know that. Now I'm going to have to talk to you with your teacher, which is a different kind of conversation, which is fine. I'll advocate for you. But I'm so happy that you did. And you were brave. And I'm so sorry that it didn't work out in that way. There's just sometimes a lack of understanding and communication. And I think there is absolutely going to be like, you can hold kids accountable, but if you don't start with empathy, then what are you doing? Then what message are you giving them? Because again, if you're working with BIPOC kids, like they get messages every day, they do not matter. That is their reality. And when you dismiss something that they come and say, or you make it to this thing where they're trying to get out of something, first, you're not acknowledging their humanity. You're not acknowledging that mental health has an impact on things and stuff like that. And so I think it's just important sometimes to recognize like people are going through a lot of things that affect their mental health that they have no idea is affecting their mental health. And so that's when we have those conversations on language of like, yeah, this is how the day went. And I think, you know, all these things, like if you think about the Black boys in the classroom, right? Like I'm pretty sure I picked up on anxiety with a few of them because they're so preoccupied on worried about a mistake or doing the wrong thing, and then someone interpreting that and then that affecting their life, their literal life or their opportunities. But there's not space for anxiety, I guess. They don't have that. We don't say that. We don't label it that. And so I think it's important to also think about what are the things that people are going through and how does that show up? Just like it's really important to know, like a lot of young people are angry and it's important to validate that anger. We can talk about how to cope. We can talk about different ways to channel it, but we first have to validate and normalize that it's okay to be angry. You know, like most students were gone during the summer when George Floyd was killed, and most of my clients were happy that they weren't having school. It wasn't during the summer, it was during the school year, because they were like, I didn't want to hear the reactions of my white peers or the staff, if I'm honest. I did not have the capacity to hear that stuff. And they're how old, and they recognize that if they had been in school, they would have likely lost their shit and gotten punished for it. And so I think it's important to understand, like everything on the news when it happened, it can impact them. And some people, they don't want to talk about it, and that's okay. And when someone doesn't, let it go. Check in later. Say it's an open door. Come when you're ready. Because just because I dealt with these things and I have an attitude, or I'm not showing up as my best self, maybe I want to come and just try to do school and not think about all the mosquito bites that I have, because the thing I can control is showing up in my class and doing my work. But I can't control how people perceive me or what they say to me or how that impacts my mental health over time, because there's not enough self-care in the world to offset that. And that's why we can't do the toxic positivity thing sometimes, because that's part of my job. And I put my foot in it sometimes, all the time, because it's a balance to figure out, like, is this a day where I give them some hope and I let them know there's another side? Or is this a day where they want somebody to sit with their pain, sit with their frustration and acknowledge it, and not to sit there and minimize it, not to sit there and talk about the positives in life and all that stuff? Because honestly, that's for me. That's because I can't tolerate your hopelessness or your feelings. When you need, as a young person, somebody to say, like, you get to feel that way. I did. I was an angry kid for lots of reasons. And I didn't show up that way at school. at all. I had a really bad temper and I went off at the drop of a hat. But I had a parent who was bipolar and who was having multiple issues, multiple hospitalizations through my career in Apple Valley. And most of my school did not know that. And part of that was because I wanted school to be school. How my sisters handled it though, it all looked really different because my sisters, one of them was a fighter. And I think they were channeling the anger of like, oh, we came home on a Tuesday and our mom had an episode and now we're spending the evening at the hospital with her. And then we're going back to school and someone said something rude and I took all that anger out on that person. And that wasn't right and that's not okay. And those are conversations we had. But I think it was understanding like, you're channeling that anger into something else. But you have a right to be angry because again, we focus so much on the action that we lose the empathy. And we don't have to understand what clients are going through in order to have empathy of the emotion that they're feeling. I'm sorry, Jennifer, I saw you raise your hand. Jennifer Ernest, if you have a question. So now we can have questions.
No question. I just was giving you an amen and a clap. And can you repeat the last sentence you just said?
You do not have to understand the situation or even have a connection to the situation to have empathy for the emotion that the student is feeling.
Absolutely. I totally agree with that. And that was just a shout out to you. Thank you.
Yes, thank you. I put the evaluation in the chat so you can do that. It's a link. Does anybody have questions about my presentation, BIPOC, youth, mental health, anything in like the 10, 15 minutes we have left? Or any scenarios maybe, I guess, that I can answer.
I have a question. So validate, and empathize, but then they have a reason to be mad every day. And how do, and like, you don't want to be the positivity. I mean, whatever your phrase was, I agree. I tend to go that way sometimes. How do we just let them sit in it until they're ready to move on? Or what would you suggest?
I would suggest at first that you let them sit in it until they're ready to move on, because then you're giving them control back. Acknowledging that they have that feeling, giving them the control to talk about it when they're ready, and then collaborating on like, what are things that you need when these things, if these things come up again? What are some things that are helpful, or what are some things that I should know that maybe you don't have to say? Is it that you write it down on a piece of paper? Is it that we have some kind of signal for you to know, like, this is the kind of day I'm having, and this is how I'm going to be able to show up today? And I can kind of be aware of that. And so it's a slow thing, right? Because if somebody's angry every day, then yeah, they're going to have days where they're angrier than others, but there's always going to be eventually an opening to talk about, like, how do you want to process this or handle it? Because I think we got to remember, like, the person that's angry all the time doesn't like it. It doesn't feel good. They're not happy. They just don't know how to do anything different or how to express it any differently. And once you validate it and you have normalized it, then it leaves a lot of trust for you to be able to work on the coping and to work on some of the skills. But we skip that part a lot. And then we are like trying to go to skills. And then you wonder why they're angry or why they don't like you. And it's because you invalidated them and you told them how you feel doesn't matter, but you have to deal with it. You have to figure out how to deal with it.
So you have to figure out how to deal with it in my time frame and in the way I need you to deal with it. Also, when we put that on, we have a schedule for them for their behavior to change, and we need to just let them be where they're at and acknowledge that and not put it on our time frame. I need you to get better and not be angry and get back to class.
But if you had a day like that, I don't know how you'd go back to class. If you had a night like I had some nights, school wasn't always on my mind in that way. But school, I mean, the thing we tell kids all the time, which I don't know how I ever feel about it really, but we tell them your job is to be a student.
Yep.
Regardless. And so just like I guess as an adult have to suck it up and still do my job, you have to suck it up and do your job. Your brain isn't developed. You don't even really know what's going on, but suck it up and do your job because you're supposed to be a student, nothing else, I guess. And just because potentially that's how our workplaces are, doesn't mean that we have to create the same kind of environments for students.
We need to remember they're not little adults. They are not little adults. And I'm at the elementary level, so we have a little bit more flexibility to well, or maybe I don't, I just take it, to allow a child the time he or she needs to decompress, to feel the feelings, and then to process. I don't know if that's a reality in middle school and high school. We need to fix the system. I mean, that's a challenge with the system, and we need to remedy that. I'll get on that on Monday. Thank you, Dorothy. Your presentation was wow. Thank you.
Thanks. Does anybody have any questions or comments? Fill out your evaluations.
Hi, Dorothy. I am school psych at the high school, at Egan High School. We have homerooms here. So we have daily meetings with kids 9th through 12th grade, and they stay together all 4 years. So kind of get to be a little community. Wondering what you think of actually presenting like the video on microaggressions in a group like that. Yeah.
I think, I mean, it helps educate other kids.
Yeah.
And it helps normalize and validate what people experience. Because I think one thing is that like BIPOC kids aren't the majority in your districts.
Mm-hmm.
And so one of the things that I end up seeing as kids get older or as they're adults, like young adults, like I have a 19-year-old who was in the district for a long time and was one of the few Muslim students and is processing a lot of messages in high school that are harmful to her now that she still carries, and ways that she's now processing the way that the school had failed her as being one of the only minorities during the Trump administration, where things I think just got more intense.
Yeah.
And so it's important that we educate other people, but then also that we understand that like people are like they're creating identities in the grades that they're in, and these messages are things that they carry for a very long time that then I spend time, years with them breaking.
Mm-hmm.
And that work could be done at school with you all in a way to save them a lot of pain and heartache that they just didn't have to go through because they were different or because they were trying to fit in and didn't understand why people didn't necessarily talk to them, or why people found them scary, or why people, I don't know, called them out in ways that weren't healthy, or questioned them in ways, or, I mean, that's teacher doesn't work there anymore, but like even a teacher during the Muslim part of things pointing her out, like, do you have anything to add? And I mean, that happened to me as a Black student. So, and like just that not feeling good.
Mm-hmm.
And then being like, who am I as a person? And why did I go through those experiences? And am I not lovable, or am I not likable? Or, I mean, I spent so much time with people being like, I don't know who I am. I don't know who I am. And I'm like, you do know who you are. You just have to find her.
Yeah.
You know, I don't want you to feel so lost, because those things are there. But like this time truly impacts people so strongly. And so you're not going to be able to do all the things. I can't do all the things. I'm not the fixer of all things. But there are pieces and moments that would be so powerful and helpful. And I think that's the thing that we have to remember. Sometimes it's just moments. Like I meet people one time A year later, they come and they're like, Dorothy, remember me? And I mean, it's 8 years later now, so I can't remember everybody. But I definitely can recognize names. I always remember the stories. So when they started telling me the stories, like, I do remember we met that one time and they're like, you said this phrase, and I just carried it. I've carried it with me until I was ready to come back. And it's like, I don't remember saying that, but that sounds like something I'd say. Sounds like how I say things. And so I'm like, that's beautiful. That's amazing. And that's huge for me because it's like, of course, my work could be long-term, short-term in ways, but sometimes it's a phrase that they carried with them that validated them, that helped them understand their perspective or their anxiety or their depression in a different way, that made them leave feeling like, I'm not crazy. Because that's the other thing too. Even if you're anxious or depressed, how the hell could you not be after those videos? But so many times people are questioned or like, they didn't mean it like that. That person isn't racist. And then the person's like, maybe I misinterpreted it then. Maybe it wasn't. And when that happens over and over, you are left feeling like you're crazy. You are left feeling like there's something wrong with you. And it doesn't just happen in those moments. It happens with all of the parts of your identity. How do I really know that how I feel is valid? Or how do I really know that what I saw is what I saw? And I'm like, because you were there. What do you mean? You know? And they're like, but I've been questioned so many times that you question yourself. And so I think it's just important to remember, like, validating instead of defending first.
So one of the things that I also feel is that it's just educating the kids too, right? I mean, like having those terminologies, like something like microaggression. Kids don't even think about it. They don't know such a thing as actually, hey, there is a term for it. And so I think just kind of letting them know that these things are, I mean, there is a name to the feeling that you're feeling. It's uncomfortable. For years, I didn't even know what microaggression was, even though I'd experienced everything that was on the video. It's like ridiculous questions you get and ridiculous comments. You know, it makes you feel uncomfortable, but then you don't know, you think it's just you, right? I mean, just think, oh yeah, just why do I feel that way? Oh, maybe there's something wrong with me, kind of a thing, more than, hey, no, there is a bigger thing here. There is a term for it. And that's what that is. That is a definition. So if you're feeling that way, that's what it's relating to. And I think I'm at a middle school level. And I think that kids do come and say, hey, this just comment made me uncomfortable. I don't know if it's racist or I don't know what that is. And just going back to, hey, no, that is called microaggression. That's what that is. And the feeling that and that goes back to, again, validating, but to let them, that educating part, right? And they can correct their peers, they're friends with this group of kids. And hey, when they say something like that, this might be a way that you want to approach them. Maybe this is what you want to say, that kind of a thing. And I think in that way, we are in a position where we can do that to kids and empower them. So, I mean, I like it kind of when kids come to me with these things. It's just kind of like, hey, it's a learning opportunity for you and me. Let's work with this together. And many times I don't know. I mean, just my color, but I kind of like, okay, I don't know. Just tell me more about it. How do you say it? So,
I just want to chime in. So, Dorothea, you did a great job. It was wonderful. And so one thing that came to mind to me as a school social worker, I used to work in high schools and I worked in a level like 3, like emotional behavior program. And I think the way I develop relationships with students, and I feel like as far as education is that we're both so compliance based, right? You have to comply, you have to comply. You know, I remember breaking up fights and the first thing everyone's thinking about is like, how many days suspension? I'm curious, what was going on for you? You know, and it's like, we need to move from being compliance, this kid is acting up because of this and they're not listening to me, to being curious. Like, I love the questions you posted about like, you know, how did you sleep? You know, how are you feeling or whatever, just being curious. I feel like provides an opportunity for the kid to be able to like develop trust in you instead of you didn't do what I said do, you know, that's not a good way to develop a relationship. But I understand that's my lens and that's my training, but I just felt feel like as educators, we need to start being more curious about the behavior instead of all about, consequences.
Because sleep is a huge one that actually impacts mental health. And young people, I mean, they all think that they're like impenetrable or nothing really impacts them. So it's like when you start like hearing like they got 5 hours of sleep, I'm like, they're like, but I'm fine. I'm like, oh, you're one of the like 1% of the world that can function on like no sleep or less than, however many sleep, and it just doesn't show up in any way. And they're like, I mean, I don't know that I'm saying that. And I'm like, yeah, because it kind of should be bumped up to this or that. And this is why. And I always have graphics for teens and different things that talk about that. But I think sometimes people are just like, I'm strong. I mean, we're a community that's so strong, right? And we're so told all the time that we're resilient, but that can kind of bleed into like, I'm a superhuman person that doesn't need to acknowledge maybe, sleep is having an impact, or that I'm stressed and this is what that looks like in my body. And we get to like humanize them. Like, you're human. And that's probably the biggest thing I say. And I think the biggest thing I hear back is like, you'll be proud. I was human today. I acknowledge this and this went on. And I'm like, good. I'm glad. You can break. You're like, you are human. And so treat yourself like that. Just because the world doesn't mean that we first shouldn't do that for ourselves. So I hope today was helpful. And it helps your work going forward. And thank you guys for having me. This was fun.
Thank you, Dorothy. Excellent presentation, great conversation. Really appreciate the work you put into this and creating this space. Be sure to check out, like Dorothy said, the evaluation link over in the chat. We'll leave this open for a little bit in case anybody else needs to ask Dorothy a question. Otherwise, wishing you well into the weekend. Thanks for being here. And Dorothy, thank you again for coming to speak with us. Much appreciated.